Welcome to the channel. Thank you everyone for tuning in. So on today's video, I will be reviewing the Pagani PD1737. Hopefully you guys saw the unboxing a couple of weeks ago when I unboxed 3 different Pagani design watches. Now in some descriptions you'll find they say this is a type of GS homage. Of course it doesn't look much like any GSs that we've seen, but I think they're referring to the dial texture. This watch comes with 3 different dial options. You've got the black, which you can see in hand. You also got a blue, and you also got a sort of a grey meteorite style looking dial. Now I did cover dimensions and specifications in the unboxing video, so I'll flash them up on screen for you guys so I don't have to go through them again. Now something about this watch just doesn't sit right with me. After the unboxing, I took a good hard look at this, and even while making the review I ended up making a list of likes and dislikes. Yeah, there's a couple of areas which I believe this watch goes quite wrong, but there's also features of the watch which are quite good to look at. Interestingly enough, Pagani Design have also made another variant of this watch. I'll flash it up on screen, and I think the dial options there are a lot better. You've got a cleaner dial aesthetic, and the markers are silver, and you've got a good dial visual. I think one of the major problems with this dial is that heavy texturing used. Now with the black being the most subtle, however under the glare of the light, it does look like glossy painted chipboard. And I feel the grey one, you might have some legibility issues. I think textured dials, there's a fine balance. If it's too heavily textured, it does get in the way of the dial, and therefore textured dials really need to be quite subtle, but still quite visible. So usually textured dials are meant to make the watch appear a bit more luxurious, a bit more expensive. However, I feel on this occasion it's actually done the opposite. It does give the dial a much cheaper look, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just that texture, it doesn't sit quite right with me, and across the other variants as well, it's just something which is quite off, and I don't know if it's because they've used the gilt markers, but yes, it's something just not sitting right with me, and I don't fully buy it. However, on the likes, there are quite a few features which are quite nicely done. We start off with the hour markers. They're well placed, baton style, and they've got some really lovely detailing when you zoom in and look a little bit closer. You've got some linear hairline brushing across the surface, and you've got chamfered edges which are fully polished. So a fair bit of detail has gone into producing the hour markers. And you've got a polished Pagani Design logo as well as the text. So they are still experimenting with just the logo or the text. In this instance, they put both on the dial. And then you've got white printing against a black background with the gilt markers. So legibility wise, you can see everything that you need to see. Another thing which I do like is also the length of the hands. I think they have got them just spot on. The minute hand extends all the way out to the minute track, and so does a seconds hand. So I do like that, and the hands do have a slight chamfer there, so they do catch a fair bit of light, so they're kind of Dauphine style hands. And you've got a thin slither of lume. Being Pagani Design, don't expect much from that department. Now moving on to the Sapphire Crystal, and this is where my next dislike is. Not the fact that it's sapphire, of course, the fact that this box style Sapphire Crystal, I believe it's just way too thick. Usually box sapphire crystals, the reason they use them is because it gives you that vintage aesthetic. It gives you quite a bit of distortion on there. However, that's a very clean looking dial. There's not much distortion there. So I think they could have gone with a much flatter crystal. Because it's also a quartz movement, it would be nice to make it a very thin watch. Currently it is at 13 millimeters, but I believe without that sapphire crystal, it could have gone down to maybe 11 mil. Now let's move on to the movement. The Seiko VH31 hybrid quartz movement. You've got the sweep of an automatic movement with the bonus of the quartz accuracy, so it's just a pick up and go watch. So I like that they've used this movement. I'm glad that they went for a dateless design. You can see a few other brands coming out with dateless watches, so maybe the voice is being heard, and a lot of people do prefer dateless watches, but of course there's still people that want the date. But I feel it helps preserve the symmetry of the dial, especially if it's a great looking dial. Now when we move on to the case is extremely well done. That's probably one of my most favorite features about this watch. The bezel does have circular brushing across the A face, extremely fine done. A great level of quality and detail from Pagani Design, and that is complemented by a highly polished edge around the bezel, giving that bezel some definition and allowing you to distinguish it against the rest of the brushed case. Moving over to the lugs, you've got again very fine satin like brushing, going in a linear fashion. and that under close-up checks out really well. You know, there's no burn marks, it's no rough edges. It has been done very nicely. And then one of the nicer features is just across the lugs you can see that beveled edge, which is also polished, giving it a really nice, you know, defining highlight. So the case is, you know, under close inspection, really well done. Move it across to the side and you've got a highly polished surface, which is, you know, what we see on a lot of watches. And the same thing on the other side, just where the crown is. Crown, as you can see, it is signed, quite small in proportion with the actual watch, you know, being only a 38mm. So the case is actually very impressive under close inspection. And this is where I think, you know, when you look at other variants that they've done using the same case, you know, that might be a better choice if you don't like these aesthetics here. So you got a screw down case back with the normal specifications, sandblasted logo on the back, and just Pagani design, so nothing fancy to see there. Now, after the case, you know, we've got the bracelet left, and I think this is where this is the biggest downfall of this watch. I get it, it's only on £80, you know, around $100. However, Pagani Design have got us accustomed to, you know, fairly good quality for a very cheap price. But the bracelet does totally let this watch down. But again, it does have a like and dislike. So for example, the end links are solid. They are fitted really well. You know, you can't really fault them. You got brushing on the bracelet, which is for the most part really good. Again, very fine linear brushing, polished sides, and a milled clasp. However, I think the execution of the bracelet, which is quite poor, and it makes the watch look really, really cheap. And one of the features I want to point out is the second link. When we look at the gap, that is quite an unsightly gap. It gives the bracelet quite a lot of rattle and side play, and of course that is synonymous with a very cheap feeling and looking bracelet. It does also have screw-in links, so premium feature. However, the screw-in links aren't that well executed. If you take a look at one in particular, just that huge gap on the side, it does look quite poorly done. So then, you know, that begs the question, how good are the threads going to be on the screws? You know, will this fail? You know, will they bottom out? Will you cross thread them? So all these questions kind of go into your mind, and that'll just spoil the bracelet. Moving on to the clasp, another thing which I dislike. Now, Pagani Design have upgraded the clasps from, you know, when they first started, but they've gone back to this style. I'm not a massive fan of this style anymore because we've seen a lot of different clasps coming out. It's got 3 micro adjust, but it's just this whole folded, you know, mechanism, which does look quite cheap. Yeah, the Pagani Design logo. I'd rather they use just the pushers that they have on the other models, you know, the Omega style clasp. It just falls over, and that is pretty well built. So I'm not really happy that they've gone back to one of these. So I think the answer for this would be just take it off the bracelet, put it on a nice leather strap, and let's see how it looks when we come back. So we're back with the PD1737, and I've gone for a more traditional, more classical leather strap, which I feel complements the design and style just a little bit more. This is a nice brown waxy leather strap with some contrast stitching, and I think the watch already looks a lot better. Yeah, definitely. So let's get this on wrist, let's see how it weighs. You know, it should weigh pretty well given the dimensions of this watch. So here's the Pagani Design PD1737 on my 6.5-inch wrist. Yeah, like I said, it does have some really nice features, but also there's quite a lot of things I'm not quite sure about. The biggest thing which I'm not quite sure about is, as I said, that dial texture. I don't really think it works really well. And the worst thing about the watch is the actual bracelet. You know, take it off, don't get it on the bracelet option. It definitely makes the watch feel just a lot cheaper than it actually is, and you know, it can probably ruin the watch as well. So I'd stay away from the bracelet, get a nice rubber or a silicone strap or a leather strap like this, and it does look much better. But you know, it does have a lot of likes, does have quite a few things going for it, you know, being a Pagani Design. The finishing on the hour markers is really well done. I really like how they stand out. Good level of detailing. The hands are okay as well, applied logo, etc. The length of the hands is very proportionate. I really do like that. So they are kind of learning lessons from all the other watches and the feedback they're getting from the community. Now, the case is actually brilliant. I love the case finishing. As you can see in some more light here, that polished highlight on the edge of those lugs, that bezel, very slim bezel, that polished highlight around the bezel, the brushing on the case, that is actually quite good to look at. But if you're not a fan of the dial, it's a deal breaker, then I'll definitely check out the other variant. I'll put a link to that also in the description. I'll flash up a picture here so you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, that's a much better option. I think it's not you know, this is quite particular, I believe, and you know, to be honest, I'm not really feeling this dial setup, but there are the options using this exact same case, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Price as well, you know, you can't really moan. It's $100, around 70 to 80 pounds, you know, depending on which store you tend to look at. Absolutely, I'm not even going to bother and waste my time with just that little slither, you know, that is going to be non-existent. So yeah, that's it for me today, guys. That's the full review on the PD1737. I also like you to share your thoughts in the comments section as always. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.